It was June 23rd, 2019, and I was visiting the Zetri refugee camp in Jordan. And the Zetri camp is an interesting sight to see because across the horizon there in the Middle Eastern desert, where ancient civilizations once lived, is a makeshift settlement of row after row after row of corrugated metal trailer. And this is where the folks in Zetri live. Often they have paintings on the side drawn by children in the camp. And on that day, I was visiting with a colleague of mine who works for Save the Children Jordan, and we got to meet a friend of mine named Esma. We visited Esma's trailer, and we knocked on the wooden door, and Esma kindly greeted us, as she always does, with such great kindness. And we walk in, and we sit on the dark brown carpet, on a dark brown cushion, with the blue flowers all around the trailer. And we sit and we drink tea together, shai in Arabic, the shai that she had prepared for us. And as we were drinking our tea, Esma was talking to us about her life in the camp, her life back in Syria, and the great work she's doing in the camp. Suddenly there was a loud noise around us. And so the trailer walls started rumbling. It felt like the ground was shaking. And finally, I looked over to my colleagues, I looked over to Esma, I said, "Is something going on?" And Esma said, "Yes, just wait." And in that moment, 10 children burst through that wooden door we had come through onto the ground and the carpet and the brown carpet in front of us and rolled around and played with one another, and the room had become chaos. And just a few seconds later, they each stand up, give Esma a big hug and greet her. Esma says hello to each of them by name, Ahlan wa sahlan, a greeting in Arabic, Ahlan wa sahlan Sami, Ahlan wa sahlan Doa. She says it to each of them. And then finally they sit down in a semicircle around Esma, and Esma sits with them. And she grabs a hold of a children's book that was there. And suddenly, after grabbing her baby boy Muhammad, who had been crawling all over the carpet, putting him firmly in her lap, she begins the story. And it's as if, like that, a magical ambiance had taken over the trailer. All the kids are so focused in, they're locked in, they're listening to everything Esma has to say as she reads the pages of the book and the dialogue. She reads with her voice moving up and down like that of an actress to make sure the kids are engaged. And this book in particular is one about a Syrian boy who, in his words, wants to be a pilot of love, not a pilot of war. So this goes on for some time. Esma reads a page of the book, and then she pivots the book so that she can show it to everybody, all the kids, the illustrations in the book, and the kids lean in, and they're eager, their eyes wide, to see what was on the page that Esma had just described. And finally, after about 5-10 minutes of reading, Esma closes the book suddenly. It says El Nihaya, which means the end in Arabic. The magical ambiance is gone, and the kids are going back to their raucous behaviors. They're playing with one another, they're hanging out, and they head out the door eventually, but not before they give Esma one more big hug, one more greeting to let her know how much they love her. Esma is a poet, author, entrepreneur, and storyteller in the Zetri refugee camp in Jordan. But it took a lot for her to get there. Esma grew up in the town of Daraa, Syria, where she lived a life of relative peace and stability with her family. That ended in 2012 when the Syrian war began and when her house was burned to the ground along with all of her belongings, including the journals that she had written her whole life's memories and stories about. And then she crossed the desert to go to the Zetri camp in Jordan, and within 2 years of her time in the camp came the darkest moment of her life, which is the miscarriage of her child, due largely to a lack of readily accessible health care. It was in the middle of this darkness, the darkest moment of her life, that Esma found the spark within her. The spark being this children's storytelling initiative that I described. Esma wanted to make sure that not a single child in the Zetri camp, not one child, felt as though they did not have a future. That these children who had dealt with words like war, violence, bombings, shellings for too long, and who had grown up knowing very little other than the Zetri camp, would have hope for a future, would have the ability to dream, and would feel confident and empowered in who they are. And that's why Esma started this storytelling initiative that now brings dozens and dozens of children to her trailer each month, or each week. Esma is one of the most inspiring people I have ever met in my life. But when we hear the stories of refugees in the media and from the mouths of many politicians, we don't hear Esma's story. We tend to hear the stories of victims or of villains, two binary stories. Either we hear the story of victims, people who are looked down upon, should be looked down upon. Why? Because they don't have agency, because they're pitiful human beings who need to be given a handout. Or we're told the story of villains. Why do we look down upon refugees? Because they're criminals. They're going to take our jobs, and they're going to ruin our country's cultures if they're welcomed in. Either way, we're told to look down at refugees. In reality, refugees could not be further from these tropes that I just described. And these refugees are powerful, creative, inspiring people, some of the most resilient, innovative human beings on the planet. Refugees contribute economically. The US government found that in the 10 years ending in 2014, the net fiscal impact of refugees on the American economy was about $63 billion. That's above and beyond the investment it takes, the small investment but mighty investment it takes to bring refugees into the country. A small investment that would pay dividends, but one that has not done enough, especially as resettlement centers have been decimated over the last few years. Refugees are some of the most entrepreneurial people on earth and the most extreme entrepreneurs. They're 1.5 to 2x more entrepreneurial than native-born citizens in the US. And they create jobs, millions of jobs, for people around the world in their new adopted countries and in camps like Zetri. Beyond economics, socially, refugees are there for our most difficult times. So when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, it was the Afghan Cultural Center, and many others, of course, that was providing aid to firemen, firefighters, firemen and women who were helping ensure that people were protected and safe and provided with food and water and what they needed. In Utica, Utica, New York, when there were factory closures across the Rust Belt, and when a town that was once fast growing was dwindling in population as people abandoned it, it was refugees from 40 countries that rekindled the spirit there, that repopulated churches and mosques, that brought hope to a city that was declining rapidly and is now stabilized. And most recently, during this pandemic, refugees have provided food for the elderly, changing their small businesses and into opportunities to serve folks who are most disadvantaged during the pandemic, providing food and equipment that's necessary. But more importantly than what refugees contribute is who refugees are. Equal human beings with dignity that deserve to be treated with respect, just like all of us. As one poet says, no one chooses refugee camps. They didn't choose their situations, and it could have happened to any of us. They're equal human beings who deserve respect, independent of their contributions. And I believe we all deep down know this. We know that refugees and all other people different than us are equal human beings who deserve respect. But there's a disconnect. Because when polled, the majority of Americans have said in the past that they do not want to welcome Syrian refugees to this country at all, or they only want to welcome Syrians from certain religions and backgrounds. And in some ways, this disconnect actually is intuitive. It's very sad, but it's intuitive, because in the absence of knowing a Syrian, or knowing a refugee, or knowing someone in any group that is different than us, we have to fill in the gaps. And where do we fill in the gaps? We fill in the gaps from the cacophony of sounds and media clips and politicians' speeches and headlines and politicized things that are all over the media that tell us the victim or the villain narrative, not the narrative that says these are beautiful human beings with lives of dignity that are being played out in communities. We don't hear the story of Esma. We don't hear the story of Utica. We don't hear the story of Houston after Harvey. My hope is for three things. Most urgently, my hope is that the world takes its duty that it committed to after World War II and welcomes refugees into their countries. There are 27 million refugees in the world right now, a number that has gone up over the last week as 500,000 Ukrainians have huddled together in train stations to exile out of their country because of the horrendous violence that's occurring in Ukraine. My hope is that countries band together and commit to welcoming refugees, because right now we are failing miserably. Only a shocking 0.2% of refugees in the world are resettled, because nations are failing to accommodate and to welcome them. Beyond that, my hope is that there are more stories that allow us to look past the victim or villain narratives, more authentic human stories that bring the voices of people like Esma into our lives. My book that's coming out in May, 25 Million Sparks, is meant to tell the untold story of refugee entrepreneurs, including Esma, and I hope it contributes to that. But beyond the stories, I have a greater hope. And that hope is that each of us, when we're faced with these stories and narratives about who refugees are, or who people of different races or ethnicities or religions than us are, we stop and we look within. And we remember that yes, everyone is equal to us, and that their differences should be honored and respected, and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, just the way Esma treats those wonderful children in her trailer during her storytelling initiatives in the camp. And that everyone is a powerful, beautiful, creative human being who deserves to be treated with equal respect and love. Thank you.